This is FluentCast. Real English, real conversations, real confidence. This is FluentCast.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of FluentCast, the podcast where we explore real language and culture, helping you improve your English skills. I'm Diego, and today we're going to do something a little more practical. Most episodes here explore culture, psychology, or the way language works in real life. But today we are going to slow down and focus on a specific part of English that often appears in professional environments, and students always ask me a lot. And yes, I'm talking about phrasal verbs. Now, if you've studied English for a while, you've probably noticed something frustrating. Even when you understand the individual words in a sentence, a phrasal verb can suddenly change the entire meaning. For example, you might know the words turn and down, but when someone says they turned down the proposal, the meaning has nothing to do with physically turning something downward. So in this episode, we're going to look at 7 phrasal verbs that appear frequently in business conversations. We'll take them one by one, talk about what they mean, and look at examples that you might actually hear at work. Ready? So, let's start with the first one, kick off. The phrasal verb kick off originally comes from sports, especially football or soccer, where the game begins with the ball being kicked to start play. In business English, kick off simply means to start something, usually a meeting, project, or event. You might hear someone say, "Let's kick off the meeting with a quick update from the marketing team," or "The project will kick off next Monday." Notice something interesting here. In formal written English, you might say begin or commence. But in everyday professional conversation, people often prefer kick off because it sounds natural and conversational. So if you're in a meeting and someone says, "Okay everyone, let's kick things off," they're simply saying, "Let's begin." The next phrasal verb is brush up on. Saying one more time, brush up on. This one means to review or improve a skill that you already have but haven't used in a while. Imagine someone who studied English years ago but hasn't practiced recently. They might say, "I need to brush up on my English before the conference," or in a business context, "I'm brushing up on my presentation skills before the client meeting." The image behind this expression is quite simple. When you brush something, you remove dust or clean the surface. So when you brush up on a skill, you're cleaning off the dust. That is, refreshing something you already learned. Many professionals use this phrase when preparing for a new role or responsibility. What skill have you been brushing up on lately? Now, moving on to the next phrasal verb. Let's look at turn down. I gave an example in the beginning of this podcast. In business English, turn down means to reject or refuse something, usually an offer or proposal. For example, the company turned down the investment offer, or she turned down the job because the salary was too low. You might notice something interesting here. In a business environment, people often prefer indirect language when refusing something. So instead of saying, "We rejected your proposal," they might say, "After reviewing the proposal, we've decided to turn it down." It softens the tone slightly. The next phrasal verb is fall through. This one describes a situation where plans fail or collapse, usually unexpectedly. You might hear someone say, "The deal fell through at the last minute," or "Our partnership with that supplier fell through." The image behind this phrase is quite visual. Imagine you're standing on something that suddenly breaks and you fall through it. That's exactly the idea. Everything seems stable, but suddenly the plan doesn't work anymore. In business conversations, this expression often appears when negotiations or agreements fail after a lot of preparation. Now, let's talk about another one that you'll hear quite a lot in business conversations: bank on. So, when someone says they're banking on something, what they mean is that they're relying on it. They're expecting it to happen and their plans depend on it. For example, imagine a company preparing for the end of the year. Someone in a meeting might say, "We're really banking on strong holiday sales this year." In other words, their projections, their plans assume that sales will be high during that period. Or you might hear something like, "The team is banking on the new product launch to increase revenue." So the success of that product becomes kind of pillar for the whole strategy. Now, the interesting thing about this expression is where it comes from. Think about what a bank does. A bank is where you place your money because you expect it to be safe and dependable. You trust that it will be there when you need it. So when you bank on something, you're treating it almost the same way as something reliable enough that you're building your plans around it. But, and this is important, when people say this in business, there's often a little bit of uncertainty in the background. It's not a guarantee. It's more like saying, "We're counting on this, we really hope it works." Because if the thing you're banking on doesn't happen, strong sales, a successful launch, a new partnership, then the rest of the plan might need to change. Alright, let's move on to another one that's very common in workplaces: ask around. So when someone says ask around, what they mean is talk to several people and see who might have the information you need. It's not about asking just one person. The idea is that you go around the office or the team and check with a few people. For example, you might hear something like, "Why don't you ask around and see if anyone has experience with that software?" In other words, maybe someone on the team has used it before, but you're not sure who yet. Or someone might say, "I asked around the office to find out who worked on that project before." So they spoke with a few colleagues until they found the right person. And honestly, this happens all the time at work. Information in companies is rarely stored in just one place. Sometimes it's in documents, sometimes it's in emails, but very often it's simply in people's heads. So instead of spending an hour digging through folders or searching the company drive, someone might just say, "Ask around," meaning talk to a few people and see who knows the answer. Okay, I've already talked about 6 phrasal verbs, so let's look at the last one for today: zero in on. Now, this one is quite visual. When someone says they want to zero in on something, they mean they want to focus very carefully on one specific thing, usually the most important detail in a situation. You'll often hear it in meetings when people are trying to narrow the discussion. For example, someone might say, "Okay, we've talked about several possibilities, but we really need to zero in on the main issue affecting a customer's satisfaction." In other words, stop talking about everything and concentrate on the one problem that actually matters. Or you might hear something like, the team is zeroing in on a solution. That means they're getting closer. They're focusing more precisely and filtering out the less important ideas. The expression itself originally comes from technical fields like engineering and even military language, where instruments or devices are adjusted so they can focus exactly on a target. And that image still carries over into business English. When people say zero in on something, they mean let's stop being vague, let's stop being broad, and let's concentrate on the exact point we need to solve. So today, we looked at 6 phrasal verbs that appear regularly in business conversations. Kick off, brush up on, turn down, fall through, bank on, ask around, and zero in on. If you begin listening for these expressions in meetings, interviews, or professional podcasts, you'll start noticing how often they appear. And the more often you hear them in context, the easier they become to understand and eventually to use naturally. All right, so if you enjoyed this kind of episode, the slower pace, looking at expressions one by one and really unpacking how they're used, then, make sure you subscribe to FluentCast so you don't miss the next one. We cover a mix of things here, sometimes culture, sometimes psychology behind the language, and other times, like today, we slow down and look at the language itself in a practical way. And if you're listening and thinking, okay, I'd actually like to improve my English, especially for work, meetings, that kind of thing, you can also check out Fluent English Academy. We work with students from all over the world, Europe, Latin America, different parts of Asia. And the classes are online and one-on-one, so everything is personalized to what you actually need to improve. So, if that sounds interesting, you can find the link in the description of the episode. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in our next episode.